So just feeling that the back of the pelvis can broaden and soften. And let the sit bones drop. And the front of the snooker ball heels can drop, and that just gives way to the toes. And we've been working on this a little bit, where we're just sort of stirring the thigh bones in the porridge pot, if you like, of the hip. So we imagine we've got this sort of porridgey bowl. And the more we can connect the hip into the porridge bowl, the better it is for our central core system. Something I've been looking at a lot for a while now is that the hips take the weight when the structures above it, the central core system, doesn't do its job. So we want to keep connecting the legs back there. So as we just feel that the toes just can lengthen away and stretch, and the sit bones can get pulled down into the ground, we feel that as the pelvis sorts itself out, that the thigh bone then is sort of naturally drawn back through the socket into the deep waist. And it's just trying to start to find that for ourselves, find that feeling. And if it's nice to put a finger in the creases of the front of the hips to do that, then you can do that, because it just helps to feel that the thigh, which is often so disconnected from the hip, disconnected from the waist ultimately. You know, the thigh bone is continuous, can't speak this morning. It's continuous in its connection through the hip socket into the underside of the rib and the solar plexus. So it's really, we want to be reaffirming that connection regularly, because it's so easy for arms and legs to become disconnected from the spine. So these practices, what should be a daily practice, to just come to the floor and just feel that the arms can go back through their sockets into the spine, to feel that the legs can go back through their sockets into the spine, that the femur bones start to sink back into, like I say, this porridge pot of the hips. So the more the sit bones drop and the drawbridge of the sacrum rolls away, we find that one of the legs, would say the left leg, becomes a little bit more light and floaty, and can just, as it pulls back down through that porridge pot, the knee comes in towards you and the leg starts to just unfurl. And it is an unfurling, because as soon as we try to lift the leg, and you can do this for yourself, but as soon as we try to lift the leg, it's heavy. Your brain has already calculated that. So can we just feel, and like I say, if you've got a finger or a thumb in the crease on the front of the hip, just helps us to anchor down through the back of the hip, helps us to draw the thigh bone back through the socket, and the deep waist, the waist goes long, so we've got this spaciousness between rib and hip that starts to happen. And as the long leg bone comes back through the socket, then the back of the knee starts to open up and the foot gets drawn up towards the sky. And it's quite effortless. There's an effortless effort to it, because we allow the leg to drop into gravity. And the foot can be soft and broad. It's always active, of course it is. I was reading back through some notes yesterday. I was writing an article, I was reading back through some notes, and I think it was Gary Carter that said, it might have been Gary, it might have been John, the foot wants to be the most intelligent part of your whole body. It wants to be the most connected part of your whole body. and the part that we are most connected to. And that made me think, because we get very enamored with other parts of the body. Of course, we think that the brain is the most intelligent part of the body and blah, blah, blah. But actually, the part of us that presents to the ground and creates the foundation for our whole body and is responsible for, you know, really the mainstay of our wellness. Because if our foot isn't functioning well, if our foot isn't connecting to the floor well, the rest of our health kind of tumbles down. Because if we can't stand up efficiently, all sorts of stuff starts to go on the slide. So we want to be feeling that leg can come back into the porridge pot. Now, maybe with that nice snooker ball heel that's found itself in its hammock, that's the sky hammock that hangs down from the sky, we can just make little circles. If it's nice to keep the hands on the front of the hips for stabilisation, then do. You can have a thumb on the ribs and you can stretch the hands down and have the fingers on the top of the hips. And just notice what's going on underneath your hands. And it's interesting because whilst we're waving the leg about, we're very taken with the leg. But if we put our fingers on the bottom of the rib and the top of the hips, we start to feel all sorts of different muscles are at play in the central core system, in the waist. And this is what we're interested in. So we're interested in that anchoring down on the back of the pelvis. Take the heel in the other direction if you haven't already. And we're concentrating on this feeling of the thigh just sinking back through the hips, sinking back into the underside of the rib. And feeling that freedom at the space at between the hip and the hip bone. Maybe drop the shoulders away if they're getting involved. And then we're just going to change over. Change over the feet, so let the feet just connect with the ground. And again, we're just interested in that back of the hip pulling down into the ground. So the long thigh bone is drawn back through, and like I say, it like sinks through the porridge of the hip. It's a great visualization to have. It makes it kind of soft and heavy and a bit cementy for the thigh bone to stick into. And the leg, again, just unfurling as that falling down happens through the ribs, through the shoulders. Shoulder blades get nice and heavy. There's a spaciousness that starts to happen to the ribs while we're in this process. And again, there's a certain point where the heel just naturally floats up towards the sky. There's that broadness, that fanning out to the foot. Of course there is. And just starting to make those little circles, although they kind of naturally happen for themselves at some point. We're not designed to remain static, so there is just a natural waving about, we'll call it that. And we feel that the more the leg falls down through the hip, the more the heel gets drawn away. So there's this two-way dynamic happening in the leg. Are you all right, Sarah Jane? Oh, her internet's dropped out. And we start to get a spaciousness between the joints. So if we bring this foot back down to the ground, and we feel that the foot connects with the floor just a little bit more, when we do this work and we create space into the major joints of the leg, when we come back down to the ground, there is more connection between the feet and the ground. So same thing on the left side, we're just going to let the long thigh bone just sink back through. Let the drawbridge of the sacrum just roll away and the leg unfolds. And we can just take the ankle to the outer side of the knee.
Yeah, I'm in again.
Oh, you're back.
I've sent you.
That's okay. So the ankle just rests on the outside of the knee. And again, we've got this lovely long thigh bone that comes back through the socket. And there's a deep stretch to be had here in the hip, in the glute, but we're looking again for that broadness at the sit bones. Maybe the right foot starts to leave the floor. Maybe the legs come in towards you. And we can just start to feel that the sit bones get drawn away towards the end of your mat. And the legs can just float in towards you. And it may not be a big movement. It may be enough to leave the right foot on the floor, and that's okay. And these are great movements to do on a day like today because everything's very soft and a little bit more pliable. So if we let the right foot just sit down back onto the ground, just finding the pointy parts of the elbows, long arm bones can come back through their sockets. We find the shoulder blades into the ground. And we can just take that left foot towards the floor on the right side. And again, it might not be a big movement, and Margaret, this might not be one for you, and that's okay. But if you're happy in your low spine, we can just start to take the foot down towards the ground, and there is a twist to be had here, and it's a little bit different. So the right foot, the side of the right foot pulls down into the ground, and the left heel and the toes pull down into the ground. And we can come back to the center. And again, it's just that movement of sinking the legs back through the sockets into the porridge pot of the back of the hips, and the hips just roll. So everything's very, very heavy. The shoulder blades and the back of the ribs are nice and heavy on the back of into the floor. And just trying that on the other side in your own time. I'm just going to come and have a look because I've got people coming in and out on my screen all over the place.
Yeah,
my goodness.
I've only just been able to join because the link wasn't on the website, on your, it wasn't up anymore.
Oh, okay, I'm
To
sorry.
go back. And Ronnie is also desperately trying to get in. So
Okay,
could
okay.
you help her?
Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem. 2 seconds.
Yeah.
You're back, Lisa.
Yeah, I was only trying to let them know that I used the original Wednesday link.
Yeah, I didn't realise it had come out of the portal.
I have it saved separately, so it was not an issue.
Yeah. I know that, oh my goodness, hang on. Let me have a look.
I can just copy it and put it on WhatsApp if you want.
If you've got it to hand, my WhatsApp on my desktop isn't
Hang on, I'll have to leave you to do that.
isn't
No, I'll
live
do it.
at the second.
It's okay, I can do it. Yeah.
Oh, have you got it, Jill?
Mhm.
This is great. Hang on. I can do it. It just means that I have to launch my WhatsApp desktop. Doobie-doo. There we are. Thanks, Jill. That's great. Okay. Right. Sorry about that, folks.
Lisa was faster than me.
Okay. So this variation on our laying twist, hopefully we've had a look at that on both sides, where we're just letting the legs come back into the sockets. And it's interesting to note the difference on the both sides. And to just feel that we've got that broadness on the collarbones. And that pull down through the elbows. Can we breathe out and let the front of the ribs just sinking back into the back of the ribs, into the spine? So that when we come back to the center, I think we might have missed a movement as well. I've got a bit confused there. We feel that long leg bones drop back in. So we've got the right foot over the left knee this time. And just feeling that the sit bones can roll away. And the long leg bones just drop back through their sockets. So we've got this broadness to the sit bones. And then we can let the feet come back down. And just letting the arms just drop back into their sockets. Feeling that we've got those weights in the palms. And the long arm bones can just start to lengthen whilst the ribs and the front of the ribs get pulled back into the spine. And when we get to a certain point, we just feel that the index fingers can get pulled away towards the top of the mat, which starts to open out into the underside of the arms. And then the arms can just start to come out and round and down. back to the sides of the body. So we feel that we've got these lovely long feet, sides of the hips and the ribs, long arm bones sink back through their sockets. It becomes a body-wide event. And we can just open out under the arms. Arms get pulled away and we've got that lovely length that comes down the side of the ribs. We're looking to make space between each individual rib. So it's just that process of reconnection again of the arms back into the spine. And we come through this movement the final time. And just coming back to the center. So we're just going to let the knees float in towards you. Give the knees a nice hug. And having a little rock from side to side. And then we're just going to find our way onto whichever side is comfortable for you. And just finding our way up into our square pose. So we're just behind the knuckles and in front of the wrist, and just finding that the pointy part of the elbow can look back towards the thighs. And again, just thinking about that process of reconnection, reconnecting the arms back through the sockets into the spine, and reconnecting the long leg bones back through the hips into the spine. You know, all the roads lead to spine. The head goes through the top of the ribs and connects into the spine behind the heart. So it's just thinking about all these different component parts all converging into our spine. So we feel that the sit bones can be free to lengthen away towards the wall behind you. And the head is drawn away towards the wall in front of you. And that just starts to give us that nice length, that nice space. So we feel that the jaw is pulled back into the back of the head, that the vocal cords are pulled back into the neck spine, that the heart is drawn back into the inside back of the ribs, and the arms just wrap around the ribs. Can we start to create space between each individual rib? And that will take you all the way down into the top of the waist. And then with the toes, we can tuck the toes under and just feel that the balls of the feet get pulled down into the ground. And there's a nice lengthening out through the soles of the feet. And the more we get that lengthening out through the soles of the feet, the more space we get in the front of the ankle and the back of the knee, and the long thigh bone can start to come back into the hips. And maybe the sit bones get drawn away towards the wall behind you, and we start to create space into the low spine. So the beginnings of our cat pose starts to appear. And can we just take the right hand and just put it onto its side? So we've got long little finger side coming down into the ground, and we're just smoothing that long little finger side away towards the top edge, top left-hand corner of your mat. So there's this nice sporadic movement that happens, feeling that somebody's holding on to your fingers and drawing the hand away. And then it's a pull from the feet and from the knees that brings us back, rotates the ribs and brings the hand back. And then we can have a look on the other side, and the long little finger side can draw down into the ground and give us that lovely rotation. So we might find that the two sides of the ribs are slightly different, but can we take the arm back through the socket into the side of the waist, into the spine? So it becomes a body-wide event, becomes a spine-wide event, and we start to feel the roots of the arms. And just noticing that the head will go with it. So can we leave the eyes looking at the floor, or does the head start to turn? And there is no right or wrong answer to it. They're just different movements. So depending on how much freedom is in the upper spine, will depend on how much space we've got and how much play we've got with the head. So can we feel that as the hand is drawn away to the top opposite corner of your mat, your crown of your head is drawn away towards the wall in front of you? So you've still got the potential to look to the side, you've got the potential to look down to the mat as well. And again, it might be different on the two sides. But we want to be creating as much space as we can through the upper ribs, through the connection between the upper ribs and the neck, and then the neck into the base of the skull. And the next time we come back to centre, we're just going to release the toes. Find the front of the feet. Feel that the big toes are being pulled away towards the wall behind you. Front of the ankles can get pulled down into the ground. And we can just let the sit bones just get pulled away towards the wall behind you. So you might find, depending on what you've been doing, that it takes a little bit of time for the shins to respond. Shin tissues can be a little bit tough, so can we really feel that we've got gravity buttons on the front of the ankles, gravity buttons through the centre of the shin. And it just changes the flavour of our child pose. Again, it makes it quite active. It makes it dynamic when we've got our hands pulling down into the ground and creating space in the wrist and the elbow and the underside of the arms. But also we've got the feet pulling down, which gives us space in the back of the knees and between the top of the leg and the sit bone. Maybe it's good to just walk the fingers forwards a little bit, reroute them down into the ground and just notice how that changes in the shoulders. Can we keep the arms connected to the sides of the ribs? Elbows rotate sort of out and down towards the ground, which keeps you out of the top of the shoulder. So again, the jaw into the back of the head, which gives space in the neck and space into the ribs. It's this pull down through the hands and the feet that drives your dog pose. So the pull down through both takes us back to something that looks like a square pose, but we don't have to stay here, because if we just keep pulling, it gives us the possibility to tuck the toes under and find our dog pose. It also gives us the possibility that if we just leave the feet flat on the floor and keep the hands pulling down into the ground, the front of the hips will go forward. So again, it's a bit like you'll choose your own adventure. Because it's just the pull down into the ground that takes us in a direction of something. Either your upward dog or your downward dog. And you can float between the two. And because it's a hot day and these are strong movements, if that's not for you, then you can just simply keep finding your child pose. And then through into the hips coming towards the floor without sinking into the low spine. But it's that connected movement of the legs that are plugged into the underside of the ribs and the arms that are wrapped around the shoulder blades and the ribs, and the head that is deeply connected at the heart center. It's in the center of the chest and between the shoulder blades. So Joanna, ribs in more. and let the sacrum roll away just a little bit.
Say that last bit one more time.
So when the hands are here, for those of us that are a bit flexible, we can get a bit of a drop going on here. So it's just a pull, the ribs feel like they're pulled back towards the spine, and we just drop the tail down. It's not a full rolling under, but it's just a little bit of a drop down towards the heels. That's much better. And that just gives you a little bit more support through the obliques and on the inside of the spine. Is it better? Yeah. Lisa, you're doing amazingly around the animals. So we feel that we start moving from solar plexus. It's the solar plexus that takes you forwards, and it's the solar plexus that takes you back. And the limbs are just blended into the spine. This is good. So if we bring our elbows down onto the ground, and if you're halfway through your movement, just take your time. But we can find the pointy parts of the elbows. We can find the forearms. We can find the wrists. And again, what we find is that when these parts of the hands, when these parts of the arms come onto the ground, they are just long hands, really. The pull of the forearm down into the ground sends the body back. We can feel that quite strongly. It starts to open up through the underside of the arm, through the side of the ribs, through the side of the waist. And there's quite a deep, stretchy feeling that starts to happen in the ribs. We don't want to sink the ribs, so keep the front of the ribs into the back of the ribs, keep the tummy into the spine, and the sit bones literally being pulled away towards the wall behind you. It's like someone's got hold of them and they're pulling them back towards the spine. And as the forearms pull down into the ground, we get this broadness to the palms. And as the body starts to come forward over the forearms, can we lead with the head? The crown of the head lengthens away, the sides of the neck and the top of the shoulders. And again, it might not be a big movement forwards because it's quite a strong movement. Feet get pulled down into the ground, shins get pulled down into the ground, and we can just find that movement backwards and forwards. But it's very much in the triceps, in the back of the arm and the side of the ribs. So can we get some nice length down the back of the arms? Can we get some nice length down the back of the ribs? And of course, as the body comes forward, so it's quite challenging. So Sarah Jane, just bringing your elbows in a little bit. You want them to be underneath your shoulders. so they're not flared out to the sides. Give yourself a base to work from. Yeah, even more than that, I think. They're quite close together underneath you. So probably here.
I lost track of what we were actually doing. Then I bobbed up to see what you were doing. You
That's okay. Yeah, I was looking at you and you were looking at me. So we've got our elbows here, but we're keeping them. If I come up this way, they're kind of here. They're probably narrower than we think they would be, because we want to give ourselves a base to work from, and it's this part of the elbow and the wrist that's getting pulled down into the ground, and this sends the arm back up and creates that loop through the chest. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, good. So can we find space into the wrists and space into the hands? The more we feel the pull down of the elbows, the more we can unwind the spiral in the forearms, and the hands can get turned. And there's a broadness that starts to open up into the palm and through the knuckle. It looks good, Lisa. You can take the knees back a little bit more. That will challenge you a bit more. Maybe the elbows come in a little bit more underneath you. It's going to make it a bit stronger. Yeah, it's better. Yeah, it's hard work, Jill, so rest when you need to. I've woken something up on my laptop now because it's pinging away. Oh. Exactly that. So if you want to make it stronger, there's a forearm dog here. The knees start to come off the ground. And you can find your way back there. If it's enough to be just going backwards and forwards, you can do that. It's a warm day, so. But what we find with our dog posture is that it's the pull down with the elbow, the pointy parts of the elbows and the long forearm. When we pull down there and it takes us back, it takes us back, it takes us back, just like we do in our child pose, there's a point where we just run out of road and we run into the legs and we have to go up towards the sky. So your forearm dog kind of naturally appears, not because we push the floor away, but because we're being pulled down into the ground. And the solar plexus pulls back and the back of the pelvis pulls back, and the sit bones feel like they're getting pulled back towards the wall behind you. So there's all this nice pulling back that starts to happen. And of course there is the rest when you need to. So we're going to come down onto our tummies when you're ready. And if you're halfway through your movement, take your time. So, elbows around the eye line somewhere. So we've got that connection down into the ground. Brings the long arm bones back through their sockets into the side of the ribs, into the side of the waist. And then we've got that nice pull through the feet, so big toe joints feeling like they're being pulled away towards the wall behind you. There's a broadness to the front of the hips. And the tummy can get drawn back towards the spine. So again, we can feel that the legs are plugged into the underside of the ribs. So as the big toe joint gets pulled down into the ground, as the front of the ankle gets pulled down into the ground, can we feel that initially the back of the knee gets pulled open, but then the front of the hip gets pulled open and the leg starts to extend out of the long side of the waist? And we can try this on both sides. So do one side and then the other. Both sides at once is slightly ambitious. But it's just starting to feel how we can navigate the joints. When joints lock out, they prevent the messages from moving further up the chain. But we keep coming back into the inside back of the pelvis and the inside of the low spine for the top of the leg. And it may be that the foot starts to come off the floor. It may be that the leg starts to come off the floor. Be mindful of the inner side of the heel, which fires the inside of the leg. We don't want it to all be glute and outer side of the thigh. So we want the pickup to be through the inner parts of the legs into the pelvic floor. And the elbows and the wrists will get involved at some point, just like they did with our forearm dog. They pull down into the ground and wrap around the ribs. So we start going in the two directions at the same time. The legs pulling the low spine out from the underside of the ribs, and then the arms wrapping around the ribs and guiding the ribs forwards into the head, and the head starts to go forward. So we've got that upper part of the spine going in towards the top of the mat. And it's good to just release and start the movement again over and over. It's repetitive exploration. Can we feel the drop of the spine? At the solar plexus, the spine drops down into the floor, and then the ripple effect is outwards in both directions. So we've got this sort of spinal extension that starts to happen because the limbs pull down into the ground and because they pull away in opposite directions. So the next time we come down, just resting for a moment, we're going to take the hands underneath the shoulders, elbows looking back towards the heels, and just everything gets pulled back and down. Jaw comes into the back of the head. And we can roll back just through our square pose. We can go somewhere towards our child pose. And they're just coming through and round into sitting. So finding that comfortable sitting position. So have the sofa at your back or the cushion underneath you, or whatever feels good, really. So again, we're looking for the sit bones. Because the legs have got that space at the front of the hip flexor, at the front of the hip bone, we've got that pull down of the sit bone that just takes us from this roundness to the pelvis being underneath the ribs and the ribs being underneath the head, and the head just suspending the spine in gravity. And however the legs are, if the legs are underneath you in a cross position, there's still a pull down through the edges of the feet. The feet are out in front of you, it's absolutely fine. The heels can pull down into the ground. It doesn't matter, it's a practice. Sitting is a practice, all of its own. Can we sit so that we're pulled down into the ground, so that the spine is pulled up towards the sky? And then just let that washing breath come through you. So the breath in broadens the ribs and allows the low spine to drop away into the ground. And the breath out brings the ribs back towards the spine and just lets us reconnect with the ground. But we feel that the jaw, the underside of the jaw, is just drawn ever so slightly back towards the underside of the skull, and that helps everything just to run like water down the inside of the spine, all the way down into the pelvis. And then the breath in comes in again and changes the dynamic. So the breath changes the conditions in the body constantly. Whether it's coming in, whether it's going out, it's changing the conditions of our body. So can we allow that to happen? And just notice the spaciousness that starts to happen inside your body as a result of the breath coming in, breath coming out. Can we get space behind the ears? Space at the collarbones? Space at the W shape at the base of the ribs? Space at the junction between the low spine and the top of the pelvis? Space at both hips? So just letting everything return to normal, just bringing your gaze into the floor. Come back into the room. And we just give the fingers and toes a wiggle. And we'll make some rotations with the wrists and the ankles, and just making some, just bringing yourself back into your body. And we're just taking the arms up over the head and the legs long for a nice stretch through body. And then bringing the knees up to the chest, giving the knees a nice hug. Have a little rock from side to side. If you're laying, just coming over onto whichever side is comfortable for you and returning up to sitting in your own time. And just taking a moment to check in with yourself, notice how you feel. This is good. Good. I hope you found that useful. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure as always.